A display of optimism that Christmas will happen this year, just days ahead of an England-wide 4-week lockdown. But will it be the 27 days announced by the Prime Minister last night? Today, a senior cabinet minister cast doubt on this, saying the lockdown may have to be extended.
We will always take a decision in the national interest based on evidence, the best information we have.
Is that yes?
Yes.
So it could be extended?
Yes.
Much, however, will depend on how closely the public follows the rules.
Is there scientific consensus that 4 weeks is enough, or is this just where we have to start?
If we did actually do everything we could to isolate, 2 weeks would be enough. This infection, will burn itself out if we can keep contacts down. I think we all appreciate that there won't be 100% observance. If there's anything close to, say, 60 or 70%, then 4 weeks is probably enough to slow this one right down.
Last night's announcement from Downing Street was brought forward after plans were leaked.
Good evening.
The Commons will vote on it on Wednesday, and Labour has signalled its support, but today was highly critical of the refusal to bring in an earlier circuit breaker.
The government has been blinkered. 3 weeks ago, I said there should be a circuit break to coincide with half-term, so that you wouldn't have to shut schools, they'd be shut for half-term. The government rejected it, they ridiculed it, only now to do the self-same thing, but on the last day of half-term. And I think parents and staff and teachers will be scratching their head and saying, how on earth did you miss that opportunity to do this earlier?
This lockdown will not include nurseries, schools, colleges and universities, and scientific advisors have warned that because of this, it could take longer to reduce the infection rates and bring the reproduction or R number back below 1. The National Education Union points to a government-backed survey which shows that infections are rising steepest amongst school kids aged between 11 and 16 in England, and are highest in the 16 to 24 group, which includes sixth forms, colleges and universities. The NEU wants schools to be closed, and now the mayors of Greater Manchester and Liverpool City region have also said this should happen.
So it's my view, and it's shared by Steve, that we do need to see a period of closure in our schools if we are to get those cases right down, and if we are to avoid a scenario where large parts of the Northwest are simply put back in Tier 3 coming out of this.
This afternoon, University Hospitals Birmingham Trust held a virtual memorial service for staff, patients and relatives who've died from COVID-19.
We don't want benches, we don't want carved plaques. We want to remember and name the colleagues that we've lost.
Protect the NHS is at the heart once again of this lockdown, and experts will be watching the data closely to see in the coming weeks if these measures are working.
And I spoke to one scientist earlier today who said that the data is so good these days, actually, that we may be able to see early signs as soon as Tuesday week, so 5 days into the lockdown. But it will require two things. One is that the public does need to comply, as we heard in the piece just then, and also the test, track and trace system does need to improve. Now, earlier today, I spoke to the medical director, NHS medical director of Test and Trace, Dr. Susan Hopkins, and I asked her about test and trace, but I also started by asking her, is 4 weeks long enough?
So I think 4 weeks is the minimum period that we're going to have to stay in this circuit break right now. We know that in March, April, with the complete lockdown, including schools closing, that reduced the transmission rate to about 0.6. With the schools open, it will probably reduce the transmission rate to about 0.8 or 0.85, which means that instead of the cases hopefully halving in every 7 to 10 days, it'll probably take 2 to 3 weeks before we see cases halve. And we know that no matter what we do, that the number of admissions to hospital and therefore, sadly, the number of deaths will further lag by a further 2 to 3 week period.
If it has to go beyond that 4 weeks, is there an optimum number of weeks?
Well, I think we'll only know that when we see what happens to us in the next few weeks. But I think we all hope that by working really hard together for the period before Christmas, that we will have a natural break at Christmas to allow us to see our friends and family. We would expect that we are going to have a difficult January and February after that, no matter what. But we are trying to push this as far as we can, as long as possible, to get back to the sort of spring cycle again, where there's more outside living that we can do.
Where do you think the death rate toll is going to go?
I think that we are now seeing the death rate similar to when we had during lockdown. I think we've got a naturally baked in death rate that's going to rise in the next 2 to 3 weeks, sadly, because that's what we see with the lag of cases compared to deaths. The modelling estimates that at the moment, if something doesn't change, that it could reach as high as 2,000 to 4,000 cases. Of course, the reason why the lockdown is occurring now is to prevent that.
Now, there has been a lot of criticism, particularly on the contact tracing. Is 4 weeks or 6 weeks enough time to try and get the system running more efficiently?
Test and Trace has done remarkable things, actually. If you consider it, in the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks, it's contact traced 4 times the amount of people it did in the middle of September. So going from about 25,000 a day to about 100,000 per day. Clearly, with those large numbers, it is really difficult, even if you're optimizing the system all the time, to reach all of the people you need to reach. And therefore, reducing the number of cases that we have out there in the population right now will help in Test and Trace to be optimized. Test and Trace is also increasingly working with local authority directors of public health. Almost half of them now have local contact tracing systems in place. The next 4 weeks will allow those to be optimized and to improve those, and to allow us to have a better system in the future.
Well, now let's take a closer look at the new rules for England. From Bonfire Night, Thursday, the 5th of November, here's what you can and can't do. You can't mix with other households indoors or in their garden, although support bubbles for people living alone and single parents can continue. You must stay at home unless it's an essential journey, education, medical or food shopping. Pubs and restaurants will shut, but you can still get takeaways or delivery. All shops except those selling essential goods will close. Hairdressers and gyms will shut, as will golf clubs. You can exercise outdoors, but you may only meet with one other person outside. However, unlike March, schools, universities, building sites, manufacturing and professional sports will continue. Well, now, businesses have warned that a second national lockdown for England is what they're calling a real body blow, especially for the hospitality sector and shops who depend on pre-Christmas trade to survive. Our Home Affairs correspondent Darshna Soni has been in Nottingham to hear from people there.
Could there be only 4 shopping days left until Christmas?
Shall I pop it in some large bags?
Eleanor Corriette has run her fair trade gift business for 16 years.
Right, there we go.
And is hoping that this year won't be the last.
Everybody's completely just taken aback that we've just had so little warning with the second lockdown. It's a complete catastrophe for us. I think I'm a bit in shock, to be honest.
So you must be worried, not just for yourself, but for your staff?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a small team, but we're very close and obviously need to make sure that everyone's okay, not just me and my family.
The run-up to Christmas would normally, of course, be Ms Corriette's busiest trading time. But this morning, another unwelcome surprise, with the government admitting the lockdown may be extended beyond the 2nd of December.
It's our major trading time, and if they don't allow us to open before Christmas, well, that's it.
It's a concern shared by thousands of other small businesses, many of whom will be seeking support from the government to help protect the livelihoods of their employees during the new lockdown. The furlough scheme, introduced back in March to prevent mass redundancies, was due to have ended yesterday, but has now been extended until December.
But politicians here in the Midlands and the North have reacted furiously to the extension of the furlough scheme. 2 weeks ago, when many of them went into Tier 3, they were told by the government that it wouldn't be possible to pay the wages of workers beyond 67%. But now that the lockdown has been extended to the south, the furlough is back up to 80%, a difference that's been described as a sheer injustice.
The First Minister of Wales has also complained that furlough has been extended midway through their fire break, after they were also told an extension wasn't possible.
Did the government speak to you before it made the announcement yesterday? And did you get any reassurance that if you have to go back into Tier 3, that there'll be no return to this 67% furlough?
No, there was no prior consultation. And there was no answer actually to the point about whether or not 67% will still stand in Tier 3. How could we have a situation where in early December, the 80% furlough ends and then it's back to a 67% furlough? In my view, that would be discriminatory.
Tom Eccles is hoping it won't be last orders for his pub. He spent the last week getting ready to go into Tier 3.
Just constant change of situation has been really stressful. Worried for all the staff, worried for the whole company. Obviously, we've got this period of time in lockdown. What do we come out of lockdown to?
And that's the question that so many workers and families will be contemplating as we head into this season of uncertainty. Darshna Soni, Channel 4 News, Nottingham.
Well, we asked to speak to government ministers, but no one was available. Earlier, though, I spoke to the Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister David Davis, and I asked him whether he agreed with the government's approach.
I fear so far they've taken the wrong strategy. I mean, let me give you an example, rather than talking in airy-fairy terms. Over the course of the first stage of the crisis, we quite rightly and very effectively actually created the Nightingale hospitals, but they stood empty, right? What was the equivalent happening in other countries? In other countries, in Germany and South Korea and other places, they were using their hospitals to isolate people who got the disease. Instead, we're telling them to stay at home, which means stay at home and infect your family, maybe infect the supermarket assistant when you go and do your shopping. A proper isolation strategy has got to try and stop the disease. Lockdowns may have slowed it down, but it was only stopped by the summer. And we don't want to have that. We can't, the economy can't stand being effectively locked down for 6 months, which is why we've got to have a new eradication strategy.
Which we are nowhere near.
We haven't got yet. I mean, on testing, Matt Hancock, to give him his due, has at least got the capacity up. It's got to be made available on the spot in every part of the country. On track and trace, frankly, it's hopeless. I mean, we need to read the riot act to these companies, and if they can't up their game, then we should take it away from them and localise it.
So let's talk about the money. What kind of message does it send to the people of England that 67% is all right for the north in terms of furlough payments, then as soon as it affects London and the south, we're suddenly at 80% or so? That's not fair.
Well, I mean, there'll be people that deduce that. I think what's a bigger issue really is what's happening is the whole country, and the shock effect for the whole country will be quite big. Bear in mind, I'm a member of the Northern Research Group who wrote to the Prime Minister saying, you know, you've got to invest in the North.
Well, that's why I asked. I mean, the optics are not good, are they?
Oh, the optics, look, the optics of this whole thing are not good.
I would assume you would be voting with some reluctance, but voting for this in the Commons this week.
Don't know yet. Depends what they say. The government's going to win its vote this week. I think we should understand that, and we shouldn't pretend that there's a sort of rebellion that's going to overturn the government's policy. That's not going to happen. But I think somebody has to put a marker down.
Is there a mood of rebellion on the backbenches over this?
There's certainly a degree of discontent about where we are right now. No doubt about that.
David Davis, pleasure as ever. Thanks very much.
Thank you.